Well, I'm not going to respond to him because we're not trained to respond to
Not
our
to him.
political leaders. But
Yes.
let me set the issue in perspective. Now, this tingling fellow, when we had that bridge collapse, fatal bridge collapse in Morbi, Gujarat, some months ago, he sent condolence messages to the president and the prime minister. I was worried. I said, where's he going to launch his next aggression? Because his sympathy is always a mask. Sure enough, we had Tawang come by. Now, I know that area very well, ma'am. I know Tawang well. I've been there several. I lost family there in 1962. It still hurts.
I'm so sorry
I
to
was
hear that.
60 years ago. It still hurts. But now, the reality today is that this is not the India of 1962. Right? That time we fought very bravely, but there was no coordination. We were not well organized. And then those who could get away, they ran and came to Tezpur in whatever way they can. Now, the great thing about the Chinese, particularly about Ding Dong, they are predictably unpredictable. We know exactly what they are going to do next. So this time we were prepared. This is the age of satellite imagery. We knew these fellows were coming. We knew they were massing there. Whether they would dare to cross, that was in their minds. We welcomed them. They claim to be a hyper modern state, but they still fight with clubs and stones. That's their mentality. And we were ready. We had matching equipment. Now,
Equipment.
immediately we said that so many of our soldiers were injured and 8 were in hospital. And I'm told one was badly hurt, but he's well on his way to recovery. We also hear, and again, I have no way of confirming this, that several of their chaps actually died.
Yes.
But Tingling will never acknowledge that. He can't. What amazes me is what does he say to the families of those kids?
Exactly.
Because this is the one child, these are all one child family children, these boys. China has a preference for male children, not for female. So these are what they call the little emperors. So what do you tell their parents? Who's going to sweep their tombs? They have a festival called King Ling, the sweeping of the tomb, or King Ming. What do you do? Who's going to clean their tombs? What do you tell them? Because that is a country in which the party owns the military and the party owns the country, not the other way around. But trouble is brewing. That zero COVID policy was an unmitigated disaster. So now they have abandoned it. And then the top health body in China, which is the National Health Commission, they've said that I'm sorry, we're not going to publish any more figures because those figures are not the figures are not reliable. So I asked one of my chaps, I said, one of my colleagues there, I said, what happened to this fellow for saying a thing like this? Is he still alive? He says, I don't know. The fellow who said this, he was the head of the commission. He said, because our own figures are not reliable. So that was something else that we are seeing. Third, ma'am, the economic damage that this
Correct.
zero COVID policy has caused to the country, that will take a long time to be assessed. Companies are leaving. Now, one must also understand that if you're in bed together for 30 years, you can't divorce in 30 minutes. It
True.
takes a while. And the only nation that has the landmass, the educated manpower, the willingness, the willpower, the education levels to be able to welcome these companies into India, that is it. We are the only one. People say, oh, they went to Vietnam, they went to Indonesia. You know, ma'am, I don't know how much you have for dinner. Let's assume that, like me, you have one chapati or two.
Two.
If
Two.
someone were to give me 50 chapatis, I'd have an upset stomach.
True.
So the economy has to be able to absorb the money, the investment coming in. We are able to absorb it. This year, 2022, we are going to cross $100 billion, $100 billion in foreign direct investment. We've crossed $100 billion in terms of remittances from the overseas, in what we call the NRIs. So we are seeing a lot of this. Now, I don't know if you've heard of, there's this company, I'm trying to remember the name. It'll come back to me in a moment. I'm getting old. But anyway, this is a fellow whose name was, he said something very interesting. He said, this is not just India's decade, it is India's century. And
Century.
this is,
Wow.
I think, it was the CEO of this company, which, was whatever the name of the company, it'll come back to me in a moment.
Right.
So he talked about it. He said, "This is what is happening to India at this time. This is what we are seeing in India at this time." And we just understand this, but the West doesn't. It has colluded in its own demise, whether it be American attempts to reorder the world or European assumption that even as the world was turned on its head, nothing need change in Europe. Western arrogance, unfortunately, is persisting. Now, as far as the virus is concerned, ma'am, yeah, we stumbled. We didn't know what to do, but we regained control. You know, you've heard of this expression which says, when the going gets tough, the tough get going.
Yes.
When I add one line, when the going gets toughest, the Indians get going. And the CEO of this company, now I recall, it was McKinsey and Company. Not just India's decade, he said, but India's century. There's a famous Stanford economist and Nobel laureate, Michael Spence. He said, India is the world's outstanding performer in 2022, the most preferred investment destination. Let me once again quote Chanakya for the benefit of the millions who watch your show. When the right action is not taken at the right time, then it is time itself that causes the action to fail. Chanakya said this 2,400 years ago. And Victor Hugo, the French statesman and writer, said 170 years ago, no power on earth can stop an idea whose time has
Time
come.
has come.
I urge you to read a book written by an American diplomat called Alice Iris. I don't get a commission for promoting it. It's called Our Time Has Come, How
Our
India
time.
is Making Its Place in the World. Our
Wow.
time has come. And ma'am, this book, as you can well understand, it's a bestseller in Kazakhstan. It's about how India's time has come. So
Interesting to know.
on the China issue, uh, he's lost. We've seen this kind of thing in China. When I said they're predictably unpredictable, they had this great leap backward. I think they called it the great leap forward. They had this from the late 50s to the early 60s. And 5 crore, 50 million Chinese died of starvation because they were told, give up your farms, give this up, start producing steel for the great leap forward. But when there was resentment, that Mao Ding Dong fellow, he attacked India in 62. Then he launched his cultural revolution, again to give some direction to unemployed young fellows, but there were millions of them at that time. The economy was in the doldrums. So when that began to collapse, his so-called cultural revolution, he attacked the Soviet Union. And then a few years after his death, his wife, along with 4 other characters, tried to supplant, replace the regime in China. And they were known as the Gang of Four. And so when that was getting too hot, he attacked the Gang of Four, or the fellow, the regime, not the Gang of Four, the actual ruler. I think it was a fellow called Deng Dang Dong or something, Deng Zhao,
The dog.
something like that. He then attacked Vietnam and got thrashed. 30,000 people killed. So now that he's in trouble, so when I say predictably unpredictable, he has only one template. He has one floppy and he puts that in and he plays it. So we know what he's going to do. I have a large land border. He's done what he wanted to with Nepal. He tried in Bhutan, in Dolam. He got a broken nose. On the sea, he's not going to mess around with me because he's on record as telling his military guys, you better watch out for the Indian Navy because they are capable of surprising you enormously. And he keeps telling his soldiers, you should be ready to fight at a moment's notice. So normally, what are they ready to fight after 3 years? And then he says, you should be absolutely reliable. That means they are unreliable most of the time. And the guy has lost it because their own documents now state that the army is no longer willing to listen to this guy. By the way, he's this tingling fellow in his own country. He's the chairman of everything. He's the chairman of the workers' union, the sweepers' union, the cooks' union, the maids' union, the drivers' union. He's chairman of everything. So when you have something like this, and if you want to post, a driver from this city to that city, he has to personally approve. Total bureaucratic paralysis, we call it nirvana. So they're just sitting back and saying, he'll take a decision. By the time the decision comes, I would be in a better world. So why should I bother to do anything? This is what we see. And
Fantastic.
so, to the people of India and those across the world who are watching this, let me just tell you, sons and daughters of India and our friends across the world, he won't dare do anything against us now. We smashed him in Galwan. There we broke his nose. Now we've smashed the entire face. And if he tries once more, we'll also break every bone in his body. You don't mess around with the Indian military because the people of India are solidly behind the army. And we have a prime minister who spends Deepavali, New Year, whatever,
Soldiers.
with the soldiers. We understand this. But of course, I always tease my friends, the generals. I have lots of them. I say, guys, when we discuss China, I say, listen, war is too serious a business to be left to the generals. And they all start. Where do you diplomats fit in? I said, well, we try. When we don't succeed, we ask you. And after you've done what you have to, then we come back and say, okay, now you wait outside the room while we come to a negotiated settlement. We have this. See, we're an open country, we're a free society, so we can joke and laugh about this.
That's
Over
right.
there, if a Chinese fellow sitting in Brazil or wherever, if he has to find out, somebody asked him, what's the time? He said, wait, I have to cable Beijing for instruction. How can I share the time with you? It's
True.
Brazil, in fact, when the virus was hitting and the Chinese were hiding the fact that they had unleashed this virus. I have seen placards there in Brasilia which said, people died because China lied.
Mm.
So
Wow.
you can imagine what it was like.
Please remember to subscribe to us and switch on the notifications for this channel. For our other social media links, more content, and to support our work, please visit citti.net. Dhanyavad. Namaskar.